Do you seriously think Labor will come rushing to protect you when whatever insane left-wing activists decide that you and your kids and your way of life and your faith don't fit in with their ideology? Jew hatred is not Australia. Jew hatred has never been Australia, and I am damned if Jew hatred will have any place in the Australia of the future. Not if I can help it, and not if you can help it. We are all Australians, and if anyone threatens and intimidates one set of Australians, they are threatening us all. And I say to every hard-working, decent Aussie who loves this country, wake up. This current toxic perversion of the traditional Labor Party does not represent the Australia we all grew up in. The sooner we are rid of this lot, the easier we will all sleep at night, Jews and non-Jews alike. As I said on Friday during Jacinta Allen's press conference following the attack on the Melbourne synagogue, Jewish resident Menachem Vorchheimer asked the Premier some very tough questions. Have a listen.
But why should
sorry, Avi, can I just ask a quick question? Jacinta, you mentioned that you're going to increase police patrols.
No, the Victoria Police.
And you're going to increase your presence. Is that not a sign that you've lost control in this state and the Jewish community are now under real threat and that your government has ultimately failed? So let's stop with the politics and let's get a short, sharp, straight answer. Have you lost control? Have you lost control? Yes or no?
I will take the advice from the Victoria Police and the Chief Commissioner, who advises me that in terms of acts of violence, they have the tools and the powers to investigate and prosecute people. It would be deeply inappropriate. It would be deeply
politics, and this is the context.
Well, Menachem Vorchheimer, who asked those questions, joins us now. Menachem, thanks for coming on Outsiders. Great to see you. Horrific circumstances, and our thoughts with your community there. How scared are Australia's Jews?
Rowan, good morning, and thank you for having me this morning. This attack is not just an attack on Australia's Jewish community. This attack is an attack on all of Australia. And I say that because this isn't anti-Semitism. This was an act of domestic terrorism. Let's call it for what it is. People went, they took sledgehammers or an axe and broke into a door, poured an accelerant with people in a building and set it on fire. That has all the hallmarks of the 7th of October attacks on the kibbutzes that we saw on the border with Gaza, where buildings were set on fire with people inside. This is domestic terrorism, and domestic terrorism attacks all of Australia, not just the Jewish community. And at times of crisis, we need leadership, and there is an absence of leadership in this country.
Rita.
We saw the Premier there unable to answer some of your questions, and at the end of that exchange, she turned around and left with more questions forthcoming. I was at Caulfield Shul Friday evening, and there was so much anger and disappointment in the community because the Premier came and essentially threw $100,000 and walked away. What would you like to see from the Victorian government? What would actually make a meaningful impact for the community?
Rita, good morning, and thank you. Lovely having you, and thank you for your support. Jews don't want to live behind walls. Jews don't want to live behind armed guards. Jews don't want increased security. What we want is this government to enforce the laws equally that exist. I've worked extraordinarily hard to ensure that the Sentencing Act in Victoria enables all crimes, whether they're committed under the Crimes Act, the Summary Offences Act, to be uplifted where those crimes are perpetrated against an individual on the basis of their race, religion, mental or physical disability, their sexual orientation. We have the laws in this country. Let's stop posturing. Let's start using them. Let's stop playing politics. People of all backgrounds, of all faiths, of all forms of identity deserve to be protected. No one should be politicized and allowed to become second-tier citizens, which is what has happened to our community, that has to live behind walls and behind guards because this government is playing politics with people's lives. And we cannot wait until someone is murdered or killed before we have a national crisis or a national security council where everyone's called. Everyone needs to be at the table now, calling it out. And if the reality is, we're 48 hours after this firebombing, and the two individuals responsible are still at large. That means the risk is not contained and it hasn't been dealt with. The entire community, the entire Australia is at threat until these individuals are brought to justice and until we have real leadership. And we need leadership because we are in a crisis and we are dealing now with acts of terrorism. Let's call it for what it is. It's not anti-Semitism, it's an act of terrorism.
Yeah, and I might point out that there are media reports this morning that a bullet was found outside the synagogue on the footpath as well. Police are still investigating that. So, I mean, that just adds to the sinister nature of it. You wrote in the Herald Sun recently that Jacinta Allen's promises for newer and updated hate speech laws are unnecessary because you've had a history of trying to get the government to act on anti-Semitic incidents and they simply don't use the laws that are already there. Why is the government not employing the powers they've already got to deal with this?
James, it's a magnificent question, and thank you again for your support. In early November, Victoria Police executed a number of search warrants and arrested 4 individuals. And these individuals were arrested and to be charged under the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act and also under this Section 195K of the Crimes Act. What were the offences? They burnt a national flag, but it wasn't an Israeli flag as we've often seen, it was a Chinese one. They dressed up in offensive clothing, but it wasn't of the prescribed Hamas or Hezbollah terrorist groups, rather it was of the Ku Klux Klan. They harassed individuals online, but it wasn't members of the Jewish community that they harassed, rather a member of Victoria Police. And they also clashed with protesters at a pro-refugee rally in Melbourne. But it wasn't members of the Jewish community, it was members of the socialist left. And those arrests were made days after these incidents. And what it articulates is our government has the laws, but will only use them to people with which they're politically aligned. And as you, or Rowan rather, said right correctly, we've got a socialist left government who have a deep-seated hatred for the state of Israel. And it is that hatred which is blinding them to the reality of the laws that they have and their decision not to utilise them to defend the Jewish community. And let's be clear, laws, every Australian citizen is entitled to equal protection of the law. And when we don't grant that, we enable a second class in society to develop. And this is what happened in 1930s Germany. When you make a part of the population second tier, you invite the most horrible forms of crime. And Friday's firebombing was an expression of that, and it won't stop there.
Just finally, Menachem, I just wanted to ask you, I know your father came out from Europe. You've been going to the Adass synagogue there since you were a little kid. Just tell us, I'm not sure if your father's still with us or not, but what's the emotion involved for members of the Adass synagogue, particularly the elderly?
So my father came to Australia. Yeah, so my father was a member of the Adass community in Sydney and in Melbourne, and unfortunately he passed in 1991, so I don't pray there very often. But it's 500 metres from our home, and the emotion is a very raw one. I mean, I don't think people appreciate, when a synagogue is attacked, you're attacking the fabric of your religion and your faith. When Torah scrolls are potentially burned, that's like burning a body. Our family has a Torah scroll that came from pre-war Europe, from Germany, and it has so much meaning. Every time I touch it, I think of my father, my grandparents. When a synagogue is attacked, you're attacking the fabric and the essence, not just today's generation, all generations gone. And there are a lot of people in our community thinking and wondering what the future of this community or Australian Jewish community holds. Are we really safe here? Can we trust our government? You know, this is not a surprise. This didn't come out of nowhere. We've seen all the markers for 12 months, 14 months. We saw it at the Opera House. We saw it in November 2023 when they came down to the synagogue. Nothing happened there. We saw it, in May. We've seen it, the other week in Rollara. The markers have been there for a long time. And the fact that this government is using weasel words rather than calling for what it is, domestic terrorism is why we are where we are. And in crises, you don't hold committees, you come out and you need strong leadership. And that's what we're missing at the moment. We're missing strong and precise leadership that's making a zero tolerance approach to hate speech. And when we get a zero tolerance to hate speech, then we won't see the violence. But until then, we're going to sadly continue to see it. And all of Australia is suffering, not just the Jewish community.
Menachem Vorchheimer, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders and our thoughts with the community there.